The UN says it's very concerned about the influx of weapons and ammunition to Ukraine, while Washington gives the green light to more F-16 fighter jets for Kyiv.
Belarus's president claims he did not have prior knowledge about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and says Minsk has not been pushed into joining the war.
A senior UN official has said she is very concerned about reports related to the transfer and use of cluster munitions to Ukraine. Speaking at a Security Council meeting, the United Nations disarmament chief warned many of those weapons could fall into the wrong hands and pose a real danger for years to come.
Reports related to the transfer and the use of cluster munitions are very concerning. Spokesperson of the Secretary General has called for these types of munitions to be consigned to history and not to be used. Measures to address the risk of diversion of weapons and ammunition to unauthorized end users and for unauthorized uses are essential for preventing further instability and insecurity in Ukraine, the region, and beyond.
At the same time, the United States has approved further military support to Ukraine. Media reports say US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has authorized sending the long-sought-after US-made F-16 jet fighters from Denmark and the Netherlands. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, an exhibition dedicated to the youngest victims of war. On display at the Amsterdam City Hall, the diaries and drawings of Ukrainian children caught up in the fighting. A rare vision of the horror they've witnessed and which will stay with them forever. Russian defense officials say they shot down a Ukrainian drone over Moscow early on Friday morning, the wreckage of which landed next to the Expo Center exhibition pavilion. The city's mayor said no significant damage or injuries were caused. In response, air traffic was briefly suspended at 4 major airports around the capital. The exhibition hall is located next to Moscow City, a cluster of skyscrapers home to several ministries which has been hit by drone attacks in the past.
Recent Ukrainian advances near small settlements in the Donetsk-Zaporizhia region border area and in western Zaporizhia region are likely tactically significant because of the structure of Russian defensive lines, says the Institute for the Study of War in its latest assessment. Ukrainian Colonel Petro Chernik stated on the 15th of August that the 3-echelon Russian defensive line in southern Ukraine is comprised of a first line of minefields stretching several kilometers deep, then the second line with artillery equipment and personnel concentration, and then the third line of rear positions meant to preserve resources. And recent Ukrainian advances north and northeast of Robotyne, which is situated here about 10 kilometers south from Orikhiv in western Zaporizhia region, may allow Ukrainian forces to begin operating in the areas past the densest minefields. If the areas around the second Russian line of defense are less heavily mined, then they would likely be more conducive to more rapid Ukrainian gains. The Institute for the Study of War says it has no ability to assess the density or depth of Russian minefields. Russian forces have dedicated significant effort, resources and personnel to hold settlements such as Robotyne and Orozhaine, and recent Ukrainian advances in these areas are therefore likely reflective of a wider degradation of defending Russian forces. Now, the lack of Russian operational reserves meant that Russian forces will have to reinforce certain areas of the front in the expense of others, likely weakening Russian defensive lines in aggregate and offering Ukrainian forces opportunities for exploitation.
Alexander Lukashenko may be one of Vladimir Putin's closest allies, but Belarus's president claims his Russian counterpart did not tell him that a war with Ukraine would start. In an interview with exiled pro-Russian Ukrainian journalist Diana Panchenko, he said that Putin just asked him to cover his back should anything happen.
Я вам клянусь, что у нас не было разговора о том, что Россия там будет совершать какие-то действия против Украины. Единственное, за несколько дней или там за сутки, я уже не помню, мы с ним встречались, у него в загородной резиденции и обсуждали ситуацию, которая сложилась. Он мне дословно сказал: впервые тоже об этом вам говорю. Он мне говорит: слушай, Саша, ты знаешь, такая ситуация, если, не дай Бог, что случится, ну, всякое может быть, ты прикрой меня, пожалуйста.
In the interview, he also said Putin was not trying to push Belarus to join the war, but warned Minsk would respond in the event of an external aggression. Lukashenko, who's said to have persuaded mercenary group Wagner to withdraw its troops from southern Russia, also says he believes there won't be any new armed uprising and that Putin can't be overthrown.
Sebastian Kurz, Austria's former chancellor, has been charged with making false statements to a parliamentary inquiry into alleged corruption in his first government, which collapsed in 2019. The news broke as current Chancellor Karl Nehammer was meeting journalists.
Wenn es denn so ist, dann besteht jetzt endlich die Möglichkeit der Aufklärung. Das ist für alle betroffenen Personen auch dann da die Gelegenheit, tatsächlich eben diese Aufklärung auch anzustreben und zu leisten.
Kurz pulled the plug on the 2019 government after a video surfaced showing the Vice-Chancellor and Freedom Party leader at the time, Heinz Christian Strache, appearing to offer favours to a purported Russian investor. Kurz took to social media on Friday to protest his innocence. His trial is expected to start on October the 18th.
Poland has adopted a draft resolution ordering a nationwide October referendum on the country's most pressing questions. The ruling right-wing Law and Justice Party wants Poles to vote on 4 key topics, including whether to accept thousands of migrants under a relocation deal with the EU. Donald Tusk's opposition Civic Platform party strongly opposes the referendum. It accuses the ruling party of trying to demonise opponents with loaded questions, while Tusk described it as invalid.
Więc ja się bardzo dziwię, że Platforma, która też w nazwie ma obywatelska, nawołuje po pierwsze do bojkotu. Sam Donald Tusk to referendum, zanim jeszcze zostało uchwalone, unieważnia. To oznacza, że bardzo boją się odpowiedzi na te pytania.
Poles will also have their say on whether or not to dismantle fences on its border with Belarus. The ruling party has previously voiced concerns over increased migration pressure along its eastern frontier. Poland has recently beefed up security amid fears of possible provocation from Russian Wagner Group mercenaries stationed in Belarus.
Haiti's capital city, Port-au-Prince. Gang violence here this week has left 30 residents dead and more than a dozen injured. They are some of the close to 2,500 people the United Nations says have been killed in the country since the start of the year, hundreds of them in lynchings by vigilante mobs. As thousands of residents flee neighbourhoods most hit by the spike in violence, the United Nations has called for the deployment of a multinational police force to help restore law and order and disarm the gangs.
A pig's kidneys are wheeled into an operating theatre, ushering in a possible breakthrough in transplant surgery. The operation was only made possible by the family of a man declared brain dead, whose body was donated to medical science. Surgeons say the organs have functioned successfully for 32 days, a record, and they continue to monitor the success of the procedure. The pig's kidney underwent 1 genetic modification before an operation which in the long term could offer hope to patients with kidney failure.
A theatre festival in the Estonian city of Narva on the Russian border is showcasing the issue of free speech, with participating countries from Central Asia, Eastern Europe and Ukraine. One of the plays is Choose a Better Version by Natalka Blok. It's a co-production between the organisers Vabalava and the Kyiv Theatre of Playwrights and looks at the choices people have to make in Ukraine.
Для мене головний меседж – це оце саме вибір, який ми б не змушені були робити, якщо б не Росія, яка нас прийшла вбивати і знищувати. Що немає доброго вибору в таких умовах. І те, що ми робимо, це такий вибір без вибору, і кожен вибирає це сам.
The actors and production team are all still living in Ukraine. The Latvian director, Valter Silins, travelled there for rehearsals.
Ну, репетиції проривалися атаками, ракетними атаками. Я думаю, це дуже було добре і для режисера зрозуміти весь контекст.
Being in Narva is a strange experience for Natalka. She hasn't been so close to Russia for 2 years.
Мені трохи лячно, трохи дико. Я не розумію, чому це є цей міст, чому він цілий, чому по ньому не йдуть танки, які я там бачила в Україні через міст.
Narva on piiril, et need kaks kindlust pole siin juhuslikult, et see pole muinasjutt, et need kaks kindlust näitavadki, et siin üks jõud kohtub teisega. Ja kui siin ei ole meid, siis on siin see teine jõud. Ja see teine jõud on Vene impeerium.
Through the international festival, Varbalava is offering theatres from regions of authoritarian rule a chance to experience freedom of expression, while audiences in the West get a peek into the theatre world hidden behind what is an effective iron curtain of more controlled regimes. During the 5-day festival, underground theatres from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan will perform in Narva.
Kuidas on ühendatud Kesk-Aasia ja Ukraina ja Eesti? Me kõik tegeleme tegelikult laguneva Vene impeeriumi mõjudega. Kui nendes ühiskondades on inimesed, kes on julged ja tahavad seista inimõiguste ja kodanikuvabaduste eest, siis ma arvan, et just nimelt siin Narvas on õige koht neid esile tõsta.
Natalka Blok says theatre's even more important when Ukrainians are being bombed and shot and they've no other way to process what's happening to them.
Це така рефлексія, яка терапія, я б сказала, психотерапія іноді. І для мене теж.